The interrogation room smelled like burnt coffee and old fear. Jack Rowan sat with his wrists pressed against the cold metal table, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like trapped insects. Across from him, Detective Martinez flipped through a folder thick with photographs, incident reports, security footage stills. The detective's eyes were tired, the kind of tired that came from seeing too much truth and not enough justice. Tell us what really happened that night. Jack's jaw tightened. His black suit was wrinkled now, the same one he wore every day, the same one he'd worn when everything changed. Through the one-way mirror, he could see shadows moving officials deciding his fate based on fragments they didn't understand. His mind pulled him backward away from this sterile room, away from the accusations that hung in the air like smoke. 24 hours earlier, the world had looked different. The alarm clock read 5:30 when Jack's eyes opened. No jolting awake, no grogginess, just the instant transition from sleep to awareness that the military had burned into his nervous system years ago. Sunlight hadn't touched the Philadelphia skyline yet. His apartment in Fishtown was small, the kind of small that made every sound intimate, every breath shared between rooms. He'd chosen it for the price and the school district, sacrificing space for Lila's future. Jack swung his legs out of bed, feet finding the cold hardwood floor. The mattress was firm government-issued discipline he'd never shaken. On the nightstand sat a photograph in a simple frame, Sarah, her smile caught mid-laugh at some joke he could no longer remember. 8 years of marriage compressed into 4 by 6 inches. He touched the frame's edge, a ritual, then stood. The kitchen was narrow but organized with military precision. Cereal boxes, aligned dishes, stacked by size, everything within arm's reach of someone who'd learned to operate in tight quarters. Jack filled the coffee maker with mechanical efficiency, muscle memory, guiding his hands while his mind performed its morning inventory. Bills due, electricity, internet, Lila's after-school program. Money in account enough to cover them with $73 remaining. Grocery shopping would happen Friday, same as always. The coffee began to percolate, rich and dark. Jack leaned against the counter, staring at the calendar magnetized to the refrigerator. December 17th, circled in red marker. Parent-teacher conference next week. Lila's birthday in January. Christmas in 8 days, though the small artificial tree in the corner of the living room remained undecorated. He'd promised her they'd trim it together this weekend after his shift. Down the hallway, a door opened. Small feet padded across carpet, then wood. Lila appeared in the kitchen doorway, her dark hair a wild nest around her face, one of Jack's old t-shirts serving as a makeshift nightgown. She was 8 years old, all eyes and elbows and questions that never stopped. "Daddy, I had a dream about Mom." Jack's chest tightened, but his voice stayed level. He crouched to her eye level, bringing himself into her world rather than forcing her into his. "What kind of dream?" Sweetheart, Lila rubbed her eyes, still half caught in sleep. She was flying, like a bird. And she said she could see everything from up there. She said she could see us and we were doing okay. The ache in Jack's throat was familiar, an old companion he'd learned to carry without showing. He pulled Lila into a hug, feeling her small heartbeat against his chest. "Your mom always wanted to make sure we were okay. I think she'd be proud of you." Lila pulled back, studying his face with an intensity that sometimes frightened him. She'd inherited Sarah's ability to read people, to see past the words into the truth beneath. "Do you miss her every single day?" "Me too. But mostly I just miss the idea of her. You know, I don't remember her voice anymore." "Is that bad?" Jack's hands trembled slightly as he smoothed Lila's hair. "No, baby. That's not bad. That's just what time does. But we can remember other things. We can remember the good parts." "Like what?" "Like how she made the best chocolate chip pancakes. Like how she sang off-key in the car and didn't care who heard. Like how she always stood up for people who needed help." Lila's face brightened slightly. "Can we make pancakes?" Jack checked the wall clock. "We've got time. Go wash up. I'll start the batter." 20 minutes later, they sat at the small kitchen table, pancakes stacked between them, drowning in syrup. Lila talked about school, about her friend Emma, who had a loose tooth about the science project they were starting on the solar system. Jack listened, really listened, because these moments were the reason he'd taken the job with Voss Industries in the first place. A job that let him be home for breakfast, home for dinner, present, in the small moments that built a childhood. The corporate world had called him after Sarah died. Security firms, private military contractors, positions, that would have paid triple what he made now. But those jobs required travel, required absence, required the kind of dedication that left no room for an 8-year-old girl who'd already lost her mother. So Jack had found something different, something quieter. Executive driver and personal security for Clara Voss, CEO of Voss Industries. 9 to 6 occasionally later, always within the city. Predictable, safe, invisible. At 7:15, Jack walked Lila 3 blocks to the bus stop. The December air bit at their faces, turning their breath to fog. Other parents gathered on the corner, forming the loose community of shared responsibility. Mrs. Chen from the Chinese restaurant waved. Mr. Martinez, who drove a truck for a living, nodded. They all knew Jack's story, or thought they did. Single father, quiet man, doing his best. The yellow bus rumbled around the corner, brakes hissing. Lila turned her backpack too big for her small frame. Love you, Daddy. Love you more, sweetheart. Be good. Always am. The bus swallowed her, and Jack watched until it disappeared around the corner. Then he walked back to the apartment, climbed into his car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic that had seen better decades, and drove across the city to the Voss Industries headquarters. The building rose 43 stories into the Philadelphia sky, all glass and steel and money. Jack parked in the underground garage, his assigned spot between the marketing director's BM and the CFO's Tesla. His Honda looked like a mistake. Someone had made a clerical error that belonged in a different zip code. He didn't care. The car ran. That was enough. Jack took the elevator to the executive parking level where the real vehicles lived. Clara's car waited in its climate-controlled bay, a black Mercedes S-Class bulletproof glass reinforced chassis. $200,000 of German engineering designed to keep its occupant alive. Jack ran his hand along the hood, checking for anything out of place. Habit, training, the instinct to scan for threats that never completely disappeared. The keys were in the security office, handed over by the night guard who looked half asleep. Jack signed them out, standard protocol, then returned to the car. He drove it up to the executive entrance, parked and waited. 8:45. Clara would emerge at 9 punctual, to the minute, ready for her day of meetings and decisions, and the weight of 5,000 employees depending on her choices. Across the city, in a corner office that overlooked the Delaware River, Clara Voss was already at war. The conference table stretched 12 feet polished mahogany that reflected the faces of 10 executives who'd arrived at 7 for a meeting Clara had called with 4 hours' notice. The sunrise painted the river orange behind her, but she stood with her back to the view, commanding the room with the same intensity she brought to every interaction. Her suit was navy tailored to precision, not a thread out of place. Her dark hair was pulled back so tightly it created angles on her face that made her look harder than her 32 years. The quarterly report sat in front of each executive, bound in leather numbers that told a story Clara already knew by heart. Revenue up 8%. Market share gained in 3 key sectors. Stock price holding steady despite broader economic uncertainty. By every metric that mattered to Wall Street, Voss Industries was thriving. But Clara's eyes were fixed on page 47, buried in the appendix where most people never looked. Employee retention in the manufacturing division had dropped 6 points in the last quarter. Exit interviews cited hostile work environment, lack of support, structures, incidents that went unreported, because reporting meant risking employment. This stops now. The executives shifted in their seats. Michael Chen, head of operations, cleared his throat. The numbers are still within industry standards. We're actually performing better than most comparable. I don't care about industry standards. Our people are leaving because they don't feel safe. That's unacceptable. David Warner, CFO and Clara's longest-serving executive, leaned forward. He was 53, silver hair, an expensive watch, the kind of man who'd built his career on knowing when to push and when to yield. With respect, Clara implementing new safety protocols and HR restructuring will cost us. We're talking millions in training, oversight, third-party audits. The board will ask if that capital could be better deployed. Clara's gaze could have frozen water. Tell the board that if we lose our workforce, we have no company. Tell them that I'm not interested in being an industry leader in profit margins if we're an industry failure in basic human decency. The room fell silent. This was the Clara Voss that employees whispered about in hallways, the CEO who'd taken over her father's company at 28 and transformed it from a regional manufacturer into a national player. Brilliant, ruthless, uncompromising, and according to those same whispers, completely incapable of trust, especially when it came to men in positions of power. The rumors weren't entirely wrong. 5 years ago, Clara had been engaged to Marcus Webb, a venture capitalist who'd swept into her life with promises and projections. He'd convinced her to bring him onto the board to share proprietary information, to believe that his interest in her was separate from his interest in her company. 3 months before the wedding, Clara discovered he'd been passing trade secrets to a competitor building a case to force a merger that would have absorbed Voss Industries into a larger conglomerate. The betrayal had been clean, surgical, devastating. Clara had ejected him from the company, from her life, and had built walls so high that even 5 years later, no one had figured out how to scale them. The meeting continued for another hour, Clara dictating changes with the precision of a field commander. New reporting structures, anonymous hotlines, third-party oversight for HR complaints. The executives took notes, asked clarifying questions, and ultimately agreed because Clara Voss didn't make suggestions, she issued directives. At 9, Clara dismissed them. She gathered her materials, checked her phone, and walked to the elevator with the stride of someone who'd learned early that hesitation was weakness. The executive floor was quiet, most employees not arriving until 9:30. Clara preferred it this way, the building still hers before the chaos of the day began. The elevator descended. Clara checked her reflection in the polished doors, adjusting an earring that had shifted during the meeting. She looked tired. No, not tired, exhausted. But exhaustion was the price of success. And Clara had been paying that price since she was old enough to understand that her father's company would one day be hers. The doors opened to the executive garage. Jack stood beside the Mercedes door, already open, face professionally neutral. Clara's heels clicked against concrete as she approached. "Morning, Miss Voss." "Morning." She slid into the back seat. Jack closed the door with a controlled motion, no slam, no flourish, just the quiet efficiency she'd come to expect. He rounded the car, got behind the wheel, and pulled out of the garage without asking for a destination. He already knew. Tuesdays meant breakfast, meeting at the Rittenhouse Hotel, followed by a site visit to the manufacturing facility in Bensalem, then back to the office by noon. 6 months ago, when Clara's previous driver retired, HR had sent her 3 candidates. Jack Rowan hadn't been among them. He'd applied directly, walked into her office without an appointment, and handed her a single sheet of paper. No resume, no cover letter, just a list of credentials that read like military fiction. 8 years Army Special Forces, 2 tours in Afghanistan, expert in evasive driving, threat assessment, executive protection, honorable discharge, Pennsylvania Class A CDL, CPR certified, clean background check. Clara had looked up from the paper, ready to dismiss him like she dismissed most interruptions. Then she'd seen his eyes, not aggressive, not ingratiating, not performing masculinity like it was a currency he could spend. Just direct, honest, competent. "Why do you want this job?" "My daughter needs stability. This provides it." That's all. Jack had paused, considering. "I'm good at keeping people safe. You need someone who's good at that." Seems like a match. Clara had hired him on the spot, mostly to prove to herself that she could still make gut decisions, that Marcus Webb's betrayal hadn't completely destroyed her ability to read people. 6 months later, Jack had been exactly what he'd promised: competent, professional, invisible. He drove her to meetings. He waited in parking lots and hotel lobbies. He carried her briefcase when she was loaded down with materials. And he never, not once, tried to be anything more than what his job description required. The drive to the Rittenhouse took 17 minutes. Jack navigated morning traffic with the calm of someone who'd driven through actual war zones. Clara used the time to check emails, respond to urgent messages, prepare for the breakfast meeting with 3 potential investors who wanted to discuss expansion into the renewable energy sector. At the hotel, Jack pulled to the curb. "Your meeting is scheduled for 90 minutes. I'll be in the parking structure, 2nd level, north corner." "Thank you." Clara exited before Jack could circle around to open her door. Another habit, another wall. Accepting help felt like admitting weakness, and weakness was a luxury she couldn't afford. The breakfast meeting went well. The investors were serious, their projections realistic, their due diligence thorough. Clara fielded questions about supply chains and regulatory compliance and return timelines. By the time coffee turned cold, they'd agreed to a second meeting, preliminary terms sketched on napkins, that would later become formal proposals. Jack was waiting when she emerged, car already running, door open. The drive to Ben Salem took 45 minutes through industrial corridors that all looked the same: warehouses, freight companies, the bones of American manufacturing, still clinging to life in the spaces between gentrification and decay. The Voss Industries facility sprawled across 12 acres, employing 400 people who built component parts for industrial machinery. Clara spent 3 hours walking the floor, talking to line supervisors, observing processes, taking notes on safety equipment and workflow efficiency. She didn't announce these visits in advance, didn't give anyone time to stage manage her perception. She wanted to see the truth even when the truth was uncomfortable. Jack waited in the car, monitoring his phone, watching the facility entrance. He'd done a perimeter check when they arrived, noting exits and security cameras and the blind spots where someone could wait unseen. Old habits. The facility was in a rough neighborhood, the kind where cars got stripped for parts and questions went unasked. Jack had served in places where danger announced itself with gunfire and IEDs. Here, danger wore different clothes, moved through different shadows, but his instincts recognized it all the same. At 1:15, Clara emerged with the plant manager still deep in conversation. Jack exited the car, opened her door, waited. Clara finished her discussion, shook hands, then slid into the back seat. Her face was troubled, lips pressed into a thin line. "Everything all right, Miss Voss?" She glanced up, seemed surprised he'd asked. Most days, Jack said nothing beyond logistics and confirmations. Just some personnel issues. Nothing that can't be addressed. Jack pulled away from the facility, merging onto I-95 southbound. In the rearview mirror, he could see Clara staring out the window, mind clearly elsewhere. He'd learned to read her moods over the past 6 months, not from anything she said, but from the small tells she couldn't control. When she was angry, her jaw set and her breathing slowed. When she was worried, she touched her left earring, a nervous gesture she probably didn't know she had. When she was overwhelmed, she closed her eyes and pressed her fingers against her temples, trying to physically push back the pressure. Right now, she was touching her earring. Traffic thickened as they approached the city. Jack changed lanes with precision, always leaving himself options, always maintaining awareness of the vehicles around them. A blue Honda Civic had been 3 cars back since they left the facility. Could be coincidence. Could be something else. Jack took an unexpected exit, circled through a residential neighborhood, then re-entered the highway. The Honda was gone. Coincidence confirmed. They reached the office at 2:30. Clara had 3 back-to-back meetings scheduled until 6. Jack parked in the executive garage, opened her door, then took up position in the driver's lounge on the ground floor. A television played news no one watched. Coffee maker gurgled in the corner. 2 other drivers sat in worn chairs, scrolling through phones, occasionally exchanging words about sports or weather or the mundane concerns of people whose jobs were measured in miles driven and time waited. Jack didn't join their conversations. He sat near the window, watching the street, drinking water from a bottle he'd brought from home. His phone buzzed. Text from Lila's school parent-teacher conference, confirmed for next Tuesday, 3 p.m. He responded with a thumbs-up emoji, then returned to watching the street. At 6:15, his phone buzzed again. Clara's assistant, Miss Voss, will need the car at 7 tonight. Company event at the Bellevue Hotel. Black tie. She'll be ready at 6:45. Jack confirmed, then made a call. Mrs. Chen answered on the second ring, her voice warm with the accent she'd carried from Beijing 40 years ago. Jack explained he'd be late, possibly very late. Could Lila stay at the restaurant, do her homework in the back booth until he could pick her up? Mrs. Chen didn't hesitate. Of course, of course. Lila is always welcome. I'll feed her dumpling. She needs more meat on bone. Thank you, I owe you. You owe me nothing. You're good father. Good fathers need help sometimes. Jack ended the call, then texted Lila at the school-provided tablet she carried for emergencies. Change of plans, sweetheart. Mrs. Chen's tonight. I'll pick you up before bedtime. Love you. The response came immediately. 3 dumpling emojis and a heart. Jack stood, straightened his suit jacket, and walked to the bathroom. The mirror reflected a man who looked older than 38, the kind of aging that came from stress rather than years. His hair was still dark, but starting to gray at the temples. Lines framed his eyes, carved there by squinting against Afghan sun in American grief. He splashed water on his face, dried off with rough paper towels, then returned to the lounge. At 6:40, Jack brought the car around. Clara emerged 7 minutes later, transformed. The business suit was gone, replaced by a red dress that managed to be both elegant and armor. Her hair was down, falling past her shoulders, softening the angles of her face. Diamond earrings caught the building's exterior lights. She looked like power dressed for a party, wealth wearing its most attractive mask. Jack opened her door. Clara slid in, bringing with her the scent of expensive perfume and determination. "The Bellevue Hotel, please." The drive took 12 minutes. Philadelphia's evening traffic had thinned to the predictable flow of people heading to dinner, to entertainment, to lives that existed outside office buildings. Jack pulled up to the Bellevue's grand entrance, where valets in burgundy vests waited like soldiers at attention. "What time should I return?" "Miss Voss," Clara checked her phone. "Probably 11. I'll text if it runs longer. I'll be available." Jack drove to the hotel's parking structure, found a spot on the second level, and settled in for the wait. He'd brought a book, historical fiction about World War II, but found himself unable to concentrate. Something about tonight felt wrong. Not specific danger, just a current beneath the surface, the instinct that had kept him alive in places where instinct was the only early warning system that mattered. He pulled out his phone, opened a news app, scrolled through headlines without really reading them. Checked the time. 7:30. Clara would be through cocktails starting dinner. He thought about Lila at Mrs. Chen's restaurant, probably finished with homework, maybe helping fold napkins or arrange chopsticks. She loved Mrs. Chen, loved the restaurant's warm chaos, loved feeling useful in someone else's world. 8:15. Jack's phone buzzed. Text from Clara's assistant. "Event running long. Miss Voss estimates midnight departure." Jack confirmed, then called Mrs. Chen. Another hour, maybe two. Was Lila being good? Mrs. Chen laughed. "She is Angel. She helped me fold 50 napkin. Customer thinks she's so cute. You have good daughter, Jack. You raising her right. I'm trying. Sarah would be proud. I can see her in Lila's smile." Jack's throat tightened. "Thank you for saying that." He ended the call and returned to watching the parking structure's entrance. Headlights swept past, casting moving shadows. The concrete structure amplified every sound: engines, footsteps, slamming doors. Jack's military training had taught him to filter noise, to identify threat from mundane, to stay alert without burning through adrenaline. 9:30. Jack stepped out of the car, stretched his legs, walked the perimeter of the parking level. Exercise disguised as patrol. He noted new arrivals, two couples in formal wear, an elderly man with a cane, a group of businessmen speaking Mandarin. None of them looked twice at the quiet man in the black suit. At 10:45, Jack's phone buzzed. Clara coming down now. He brought the car to the hotel entrance, engine running, door ready. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Jack's instincts sharpened. Clara was punctual to a fault. If she said now, she meant now. He pulled out his phone, called her. Straight to voicemail, not turned off, silenced, which meant she was still inside, still at the event, but unavailable. Jack's mind ran calculations. Give it 5 more minutes. If she didn't appear, protocol required him to check the ballroom. 12 minutes after her text, the hotel's main doors opened. Clara emerged, but not alone. 3 men flanked her, expensive suits and louder voices, the kind of people who believed volume was persuasive. Clara's smile was fixed, professional, the same one Jack had seen her use in meetings when she was being polite to people she couldn't stand. One of the men had his hand on Clara's elbow. She pulled away, still smiling, still maintaining the facade. Jack opened the car door, making himself visible. Clara's eyes found him, and something in her expression shifted. Relief mixed with irritation, the complicated calculus of a woman who didn't want to need rescuing, but recognized when extraction was necessary. Jack stepped forward, moving between Clara and the 3 men with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to announce his intentions. "Miss Voss, your car is ready." The man who touched Clara's elbow frowned at alcohol, making his face ruddy. "We're not done here. We were just discussing the after-party." Jack's voice stayed level, professional. "With respect, sir, Miss Voss has an early meeting." "Good evening, gentlemen." He gestured toward the car. Clara moved and Jack positioned himself to block any attempt to follow. The 3 men exchanged glances, the kind of silent communication that men have when deciding whether to challenge another man's authority. Jack met their eyes one at a time, not aggressive, but absolutely clear. They could escalate this if they wanted. He'd prefer they didn't. The largest of the 3 stepped forward. Richard Cross, 60 years old, but trying hard to look 50, expensive haircut, and watch that cost more than Jack's annual salary. His eyes were calculating, measuring Jack like a potential investment. You must be the driver everyone talks about. Very protective of our Clara. Jack didn't take the bait. Have a good evening, Mr. Cross. Clara was already moving toward the car. Jack waited until she was safely inside, then rounded to the driver's side. Through the rearview mirror, he could see the three men still standing under the hotel's awning, watching, talking among themselves. One of them, Marcus Webb, Jack realized, recognizing him from photos and old news articles, was on his phone. Jack pulled away from the curb, merging into traffic. In the back seat, Clara was silent, staring out the window. Her hands were clasped together, knuckles white. Jack gave her space, didn't ask questions, just drove. 5 blocks from the hotel, Clara's voice cut through the silence. Thank you for that. Just doing my job, Miss Voss. They wanted me to go to Richard Cross's suite for drinks, to continue discussing their investment proposal. Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Did you want to go? Clara's laugh was bitter, hollow. No, but saying no to men like Richard Cross comes with consequences. Lost investments, damaged relationships, rumors about being difficult, cold, unable to play the game. Jack merged onto the Schuylkill Expressway, the city lights reflecting off the river below. The game shouldn't require that. Clara looked up, met his eyes in the rearview mirror. No, it shouldn't, but that's the world we live in. They drove in silence for another 10 minutes. Jack exited toward Clara's apartment in Rittenhouse Square, navigation on autopilot. His mind was working through the night's interactions, categorizing, analyzing. Richard Cross and his associates weren't just drunk businessmen making inappropriate advances. They were calculated, predatory. The kind of people Jack had encountered before, men who viewed power as permission. At Clara's building, Jack pulled to the curb. The doorman was absent, unusual for this time of night. Jack noted it, filed it away. He exited the car, opened Clara's door, prepared to help her out. Clara stood, wobbled slightly. Jack caught her elbow, steadying her. Easy, Miss Voss. Her eyes were unfocused, pupils dilated. I don't feel well. Jack's instincts screamed. He'd seen this before. Too much alcohol, yes, but also something else. Something deliberate. How many drinks did you have? 2, maybe 3. I don't remember. Jack glanced around the empty street. His training kicked in, running through options. Take her inside, get her safe, assess the situation. He helped Clara toward the building entrance, supporting her weight as she leaned against him. I'm sorry, this is embarrassing. You have nothing to be sorry for. They entered the lobby. Still no doorman. Security camera blinked in the corner, red light steady. Jack found Clara's keys in her purse, unlocked the elevator, pressed the button for the 15th floor. Clara slumped against the elevator wall, eyes closing. Stay with me, Miss Voss. Almost there. Her apartment was at the end of the hall, corner unit with views of the square. Jack unlocked the door, helped Clara inside. The apartment was exactly what he'd expected. Expensive furniture, minimal decoration, no personal touches. It looked like a hotel room someone had been living in for years without ever really moving in. Jack guided Clara to the couch. She collapsed onto it, barely conscious. He grabbed a blanket from the bedroom closet, covered her, went to the kitchen for water. Left the glass on the coffee table where she could reach it. Then he took off his suit jacket and placed it over her shoulders, extra warmth against the apartment's aggressive air conditioning. Jack checked the door locks, the windows, the fire escape of access. Everything secure. He could leave now. His job was done. Clara was safe inside her apartment, door locked behind him. But Jack's instincts wouldn't let him walk away. He thought about Richard Cross's hand on Clara's elbow, about the 3 men watching as they drove away, about the doorman's convenient absence. He returned to the living room, pulled a chair from the dining table, positioned it across from the couch where he could see both Clara and the apartment door. Then he sat down, phone in hand, and settled in to wait. The city outside grew quieter. Distant sirens, car horns, the ambient noise of 8 million people living their lives in proximity. Jack stayed awake, years of military training overriding his body's desire for rest. He could go days without sleep if necessary. Tonight felt necessary. At 1:30 a.m., movement outside the apartment door. Voices in the hallway, male low. Jack stood silently, moved to the peephole. 3 men standing in the corridor, Richard Cross, Marcus Webb, and David Chen, the third member of their group from the hotel. They were discussing something voices just below the threshold of clarity. Jack's hand moved to his phone finger, hovering over 911. But they weren't trying to break in, weren't making threats. Just standing there talking, occasionally glancing at Clara's door. After 15 minutes, they left. Jack heard the elevator ding the mechanical hum of descent. He returned to his chair and continued his vigil. Whatever they'd planned, his presence, even unknown to them, had complicated it. Good. At 3:15, Clara stirred. Her eyes opened, confused, disoriented. The apartment was dark except for the ambient light from the street below. She saw Jack sitting across from her, saw his jacket on her shoulders, saw the glass of water on the table. Panic flooded her face. Her eyes went wide, her breathing accelerated. She sat up fast, too fast, immediately regretting it as the room spun. "What are you doing here?" Jack stood slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. "You were in no condition to be alone, Miss Voss. I stayed to make sure you were safe." Her voice rose, still foggy with whatever had been in her system. "You're in my apartment, in the middle of the night. And I don't remember, Miss Voss. I understand how this looks, but I never touched you. I stayed in this chair all night. You can check the security cameras if you don't believe me." Clara grabbed a throw pillow from the couch and hurled it at him. It missed by 3 feet, her coordination still compromised. "I said get out now." Jack picked up his jacket from where it had fallen. He walked toward the door, stopped, turned back. "For what it's worth, Miss Voss, I was just trying to do the right thing." He left. The door closed quietly behind him, the sound of it echoing through the empty hallway. Jack stood in the corridor for a moment, forehead against the wall, exhaustion finally catching up to him. He'd done what he thought was right. Clara hated him for it. That was okay. Her safety was worth her hatred. He took the elevator down, walked through the empty lobby out into the pre-dawn cold. His car was parked 2 blocks away where he'd left it when he'd helped Clara inside. Jack climbed in, started the engine, and drove through the silent city toward Mrs. Chen's restaurant. Lila was asleep in the back booth, curled under Mrs. Chen's coat, her homework scattered across the table. Mrs. Chen sat nearby doing bookkeeping by the light of a small lamp. She looked up when Jack entered, her expression knowing, Monk Knight. "Something like that. The girl, she's okay." Jack thought about Clara's face, the fear and confusion and anger all mixed together. "She will be." Mrs. Chen nodded, started closing her ledger. "I made you food. You eat before you go. I should get Lila home. Food first, then home. You need strength to be good father." Jack didn't argue. Mrs. Chen disappeared into the kitchen, returned with a container of dumplings and a thermos of hot tea. Jack ate standing up, barely tasting the food, just refueling. When he finished, Mrs. Chen waved away his attempt to pay. "You take care of my community. I take care of you. This is balance." Jack carefully lifted Lila from the booth. She stirred, mumbled something incoherent, then settled against his chest, still asleep. He carried her to the car, buckled her into the back seat, drove the 15 minutes home. By the time he'd carried her upstairs and tucked her into bed, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. Jack stood in Lila's doorway, watching her sleep. Her face was peaceful, innocent, untouched by the ugliness he'd witnessed tonight. This was why he'd taken the job with Voss Industries. This was why he drove instead of deployed, why he waited in parking garages instead of patrolling hostile territories. Because Lila needed a father who came home not medals delivered to her by men in dress uniforms. He returned to his own room, lay down on top of the covers still in his clothes. His phone sat on the nightstand, silent. No text from Clara, no call from her assistant, no acknowledgement that tonight had happened at all. Jack closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind replayed the evening Richard crossed his hand on Clara's elbow. The 3 men in the hallway outside her door. Clara's face when she'd woken up seeing him there, jumping to the worst possible conclusion. He'd done the right thing. He was certain of that. But certainty didn't make it hurt less to be seen as a threat when all he'd tried to be was a shield. At 7, Lila's alarm went off. Jack rose, made breakfast, went through the morning routine. Lila talked about her day at Mrs. Chen's restaurant, about the dumplings and the nice customer who'd given her $5 for being so helpful. Jack listened, nodded, smiled. When appropriate, his mind only half present. At 8:30, after walking Lila to the bus stop, Jack drove to the Voss Industries garage. His shift started at 9. Clara would need the car at 9:15 for her morning meetings. Jack parked, walked to the locker room, splashed water on his face. In the mirror, he looked worse than yesterday, exhausted, hollowed out, operating on fumes and obligation. The other drivers were already there drinking coffee and exchanging the morning's gossip. Jack ignored them, went to retrieve Clara's car from its bay. He performed his usual inspection, checking fluids and tire pressure, and making sure everything was in order. Then he drove it to the executive entrance and waited. 9:15 came and went. No Clara. Jack checked his phone. No messages. 9:30, 9:45. At 10, Clara's assistant appeared, a young woman named Jennifer, who always seemed slightly overwhelmed by the proximity to power. Mr. Rowan, Miss Voss won't need the car today. She's working from home, Jack nodded. Should I remain on call? Jennifer checked her tablet. No, take the day. She'll text if anything changes. Jack returned the car to its bay, clocked out at the security office, and drove home. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty. Lila wouldn't be back until 3:30. Jack had 7 hours to fill with nothing but his thoughts and the growing certainty that he'd just lost the one job that allowed him to be the father Lila needed. He made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, stared at his phone. Should he text Clara? Apologize, explain. But what was there to explain? He'd stayed because leaving felt dangerous. He'd protected her because that was what his training, his instincts, his entire moral framework demanded. If she couldn't understand that, no explanation would bridge the gap. At noon, Jack's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered cautiously. Hello, Mr. Rowan. This is Detective Martinez, Philadelphia Police. I need you to come down to the station. We have some questions about last night. Jack's stomach dropped. What kind of questions? Just need to clarify some details. Nothing to worry about. Can you be here by 1? I'll be there. Jack ended the call, mind racing. Clara had called the police. She'd filed a report. He was going to be arrested for trying to keep her safe. The irony was so bitter he could taste it. He changed into a fresh suit, the only other one he owned, then drove to the police station. The building squatted in Center City like a concrete fortress, its architecture speaking the language of authority and consequences. Jack parked, walked inside, gave his name to the desk. Sergeant. 15 minutes later, Detective Martinez appeared. Tired eyes, cheap suit, the look of a man who'd seen every variation of human behavior and remained unimpressed by all of it. Mr. Rowan, thank you for coming. Follow me. They walked through corridors painted institutional green, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the smell of burnt coffee and old fear permeating everything. The interrogation room was small, windowless, designed to make people uncomfortable. Jack sat in the chair, Detective Martinez indicated, hands flat on the metal table. Tell us what really happened that night. And that was where it had started. 24 hours ago, Jack had been a driver, a father, a man, trying to do the right thing in a world that punished virtue as often as it rewarded it. Now he sat in an interrogation room under suspicion for the crime of staying when leaving might have been safer, but would certainly have been wrong. Detective Martinez opened the folder, spread photographs across the table. Security footage stills time-stamped and damning in their silence. Jack helping Clara into her building. Jack entering her apartment. Jack sitting in the chair, frozen in infrared, watching over her through the dark hours. Miss Voss called this morning. Said she woke up in her apartment with you present. Said she didn't remember how she got there. Didn't remember inviting you in. She was scared, Mr. Rowan. Can you understand that? Yes, I can understand it, and I can explain it. Martinez leaned back, arms crossed. I'm listening. Jack told the story. The hotel pickup, Clara's condition, the missing doorman, the 3 men in the hallway. Every detail, every decision, every moment that had led to him sitting in that chair while Clara slept off whatever had been in her system. Martinez listened without interrupting, taking notes, his expression revealing nothing. When Jack finished, Martinez tapped his pen against the folder. And you just decided to stay. All night without her knowledge or consent. I decided she was vulnerable and potentially in danger. I decided that my job is to keep her safe, and leaving her alone when she was barely conscious didn't qualify as safe. So yes, detective, I stayed. I sat in that chair for 6 hours. I never approached her, never touched her beyond helping her to the couch. I stayed because it was the right thing to do. Martinez studied Jack for a long moment. You have a military background. Special forces. Yes. Decorated, honorably discharged. Clean record. Yes. So why take a job as a driver? Man with your skills could be making 3 times the salary doing private security, executive protection, consulting work. Jack's jaw tightened. Because I have an 8-year-old daughter who needs a father present in her life, not deployed to some foreign country or traveling 50 weeks a year. This job lets me be home for breakfast and dinner. It lets me walk her to the bus stop and help with homework. That's worth more than salary. Martinez nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. I have 2 kids myself, 19 and 16. I missed a lot of their growing up working this job. I understand the choice you made, but I also need to understand what happened last night because right now we have a very scared woman who woke up with a man in her apartment and no clear memory of how that happened. Jack leaned forward, voice steady but intense. Then I suggest you check your own security footage from the Bellevue Hotel. Check the exterior cameras from Miss Voss's building. Because if you do, you'll see 3 men, Richard Cross, Marcus Webb, and David Chen standing outside her apartment door at 1:30 in the morning. You'll see them there for 15 minutes discussing something, checking her door. And maybe you'll start asking yourself what their plans were and why they disappeared when those plans got complicated. Martinez's eyebrows rose. You saw them? I saw them through the peephole. They didn't know I was there. But they knew where Clara lived. They knew she was alone, or thought she was. And they had a plan. I interrupted it. The detective wrote something down, underlined it twice. That's a serious allegation. It's what I witnessed. Check your footage. Talk to the Bellevue staff about what Clara was drinking, who was serving her, whether her glass was ever out of her sight. Do the investigation you're trained to do, detective, and I think you'll find that I'm not the person you should be interrogating right now. Martinez closed the folder, stood. Wait here. He left the room. Jack sat alone in the fluorescent silence, staring at the one-way mirror, wondering who was watching from the other side. His life had fractured in the past 24 hours. His job was probably gone. His reputation was under investigation. And Clara, the woman he tried to protect, now saw him as a threat. The door opened. Martinez returned, but not alone. Clara stood beside him, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, or lack of sleep, or both. She looked at Jack, and the fear from earlier was gone, replaced by something else. Guilt, shame, understanding. Mr. Rowan, you are free to go. Martinez's voice was professional but not unkind. Miss Voss has provided additional information that corroborates your account. We'll be investigating the 3 men you mentioned. If we need anything else, we'll be in touch. Jack stood slowly, not taking his eyes off Clara. She looked away, first unable to meet his gaze. He walked past her, past Martinez, out of the interrogation room. The hallway felt longer on the way out, every step echoing like a judgment. Mr. Rowan, Clara's voice stopped him. Jack turned, awaiting. She walked toward him, Martinez hanging back to give them space. I watched the security footage. All of it. From the lobby, from the hallway, from my apartment. Her voice cracked. I saw what you did. I saw you sit in that chair for 6 hours. I saw the 3 men outside my door. I saw everything. Jack said nothing. What was there to say? I told you I was trying to do the right thing. You didn't believe me. That's the world we live in. I'm sorry. 2 words. Inadequate and necessary. Jack nodded once, accepting them, not because they fixed anything, but because refusing them would hurt them both. I need to go pick up my daughter from school. He turned and walked away, leaving Clara standing in the police station hallway, leaving the whole situation behind him like a coat he'd worn too long. The December air bit his face when he emerged outside. The sun was too bright, the day too normal. Jack climbed into his Honda, started the engine, and drove toward Lila's school. He was early, arriving 45 minutes before dismissal. Jack parked across the street, watching children through the chain-link fence as they played at recess. He spotted Lila on the swings, pumping her legs, hair flying, laughing at something her friend Emma had said. She looked so free, so unburdened by the weight that crushed adults into compromised shapes. Jack's phone buzzed. Text from Clara. Can we talk? He stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a simple response. Tomorrow. I need to be with my daughter today. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then I understand. Thank you for everything. I'm sorry I didn't see it until now. Jack pocketed his phone. The apology changed nothing and everything. He was still exhausted. His job was still uncertain. But he'd done what his conscience demanded, and Clara finally understood why. That would have to be enough. The bell rang. Children poured out of the building, a river of backpacks and noise and energy. Lila spotted Jack's car, her face lighting up with surprise and delight. She ran across the grass, Emma trailing behind, and threw herself at Jack the moment he stepped out of the Honda. "Daddy, why are you here early? Did something happen?" Jack hugged her tight, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and playground dirt. "I just wanted to see you. Is that okay?" "It's the best. Can Emma come over?" "We have a project." Jack looked at Emma's mother, who was approaching with that careful smile parents used when assessing other adults' trustworthiness. He recognized her from previous pickups, but had never really talked to her. "Sure, if it's okay with Emma's mom." Arrangements were made. Emma's mother would pick up her daughter at 6. The two girls piled into Jack's back seat, immediately launching into excited chatter about their solar system project. Jack drove home, listening to their conversation, letting it wash over him like absolution he hadn't earned, but desperately needed. At home, the girls spread construction paper and markers across the kitchen table, building planets out of colored cardboard. Jack made them snacks, apple slices, and peanut butter, then retreated to the living room. He sat on the couch, exhausted down to his bones, but unable to sleep, with the girls in the next room needing supervision. His phone buzzed periodically. "Clara's assistant, Miss Voss, wants to know if you are available tomorrow at 8 a.m. Jack confirmed. Another message an hour later. "She'd like to meet at the company garage if that works for you." Jack confirmed again. At 6, Emma's mother arrived. The girls were reluctant to part promises of continued collaboration extracted before Emma was allowed to leave. Jack closed the door suddenly, alone with Lila. The apartment quiet except for her humming as she cleaned up markers. "Daddy, are you okay? You seem sad." Jack pulled Lila onto his lap, tucked her head under his chin. "I'm tired, sweetheart. Just tired. But I'm okay now that I'm with you. Did something bad happen at work?" Jack considered how much truth an 8-year-old could handle. Sometimes grown-ups misunderstand each other. "Someone thought I did something wrong, but I didn't. It got sorted out, but it was stressful." "Did you get in trouble for a little while?" "But not anymore." "Good. Because you're the best daddy and you never do anything wrong on purpose." Jack's eyes burned. "Oh, baby, I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. But I try really hard to do what's right, even when it's hard. Like staying with someone who needs help, even if they get mad at you later." Jack pulled back, looked at Lila's face. Had she overheard him on the phone, seen something in his expression? She was too perceptive, too smart, too much like Sarah. "Exactly like that. How did you know? Mom told me once. In a dream, I mean. She said you always stay. That's what makes you different." Jack's throat closed. He held Elila tighter, unable to speak, unable to do anything but hold on to this perfect, impossible child who somehow carried her mother's wisdom, even though Sarah had been gone for 5 years. They made dinner together, grilled cheese and tomato soup, simple and warm. They ate in front of the television, breaking Jack's usual rule about screens during meals, watching a nature documentary about whales. Lila fell asleep on the couch before it ended, exhausted from her day. Jack carried her to bed, tucked her in, kissed her forehead. In his own room, Jack finally allowed himself to collapse. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the past 36 hours. Clara's face at the hotel, trapped by men who saw her as an acquisition. The drive home, her vulnerability obvious and terrifying. The decision to stay made in an instant, but carrying such weight. Her fear when she woke up. The police station, the interrogation, the moment she'd walked in, and he'd seen the understanding in her eyes. Sleep came eventually, dreamless and deep. When Jack's alarm went off at 5:30, he woke with the clarity that exhaustion sometimes brings. He'd done what his conscience demanded. Clara understood now. Whatever happened next, he could face it, knowing he'd chosen right over easy. At 7:30, Jack drove to the Voss Industries garage. He arrived early, parked his Honda in the visitor section, and walked into the facility. The smell of oil and metal was familiar grounding. Mechanics were already working the first shift, preparing vehicles for executives who'd arrive at 9. Jack walked to Clara's Mercedes, found his inspection checklist clipboard hanging on its usual hook. He performed his routine check, noting fluid levels and tire pressure, making sure everything was in order. At 7:55, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned. Clara stood there, dressed in her usual corporate armor, navy suit, hair pulled back, commanding presence. But her eyes were different, softer, uncertain in a way Jack had never seen. "Good morning, Miss Voss." Clara winced slightly. "Could you call me Clara?" "At least when we're alone," Jack set down his clipboard. "If that's what you'd prefer." They stood in the garage's fluorescent lighting, the silence stretching between them like a bridge neither was sure how to cross. Finally, Clara spoke. "I watched all the footage. From the hotel, from my building, from my apartment." Her voice was steady but quiet. "I saw you carry me inside. Saw you check the locks, get me, water cover me with a blanket. Saw you put your jacket over my shoulders." She paused, swallowing hard. "I saw you sit in that chair for 6 hours straight. Never moving closer, never approaching, just watching over me." Jack nodded. "I couldn't leave you alone. It didn't feel safe." And the three men. Clara's expression hardened. "Richard Cross and his associates. They came to my apartment. They waited outside my door for 15 minutes. I saw them through the peephole. I would have called the police if they tried to force entry. They didn't try because they thought I was alone. They thought." Clara's voice broke. She looked away, composing herself. "They thought I'd be an easy target, drunk, unconscious, unable to resist or remember. And if you hadn't stayed, if you just dropped me off and left like any normal driver would, I don't want to think about what would have happened." Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't want to think about it either. "But nothing happened. You're safe. That's what matters." Clara looked at him with an intensity that felt almost painful. "Why did you stay? Really, you could have called my assistant, called building security, done a dozen things that would have covered your liability without putting yourself at risk." So why? Jack was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because 3 years ago, my wife was in a similar situation. Company event, too much to drink, men who saw her vulnerability as opportunity. I was deployed overseas. She called me, told me she felt unsafe. I told her to find a cab to go home. She tried, but they followed her, convinced her to go to an after party. Said it would be bad for her career if she left." Clara's hand went to her mouth. "Oh, God. Jack, I didn't know. By the time the police arrived, it was too late. They called it an overdose, said she took the pills herself. The investigation went nowhere. The men claimed she was willing, said she'd been depressed, turned her death into questions about her mental state instead of their actions." Jack's voice was steady, but his hands clenched into fists. "I wasn't there when she needed me. I'll carry that for the rest of my life. So when I see someone in danger, any woman in a vulnerable position, I don't walk away. I can't. Because I know exactly what happens when nobody stays." Tears rolled down Clara's face, ruining the careful makeup she'd applied that morning. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for what happened to your wife. I'm sorry for accusing you. I'm sorry for everything." Jack stepped forward, not touching, but closing the distance. "You were scared. You reacted the way anyone would when they wake up confused in their own home with someone unexpected present. You have nothing to apologize for. But I do, because I should have trusted you. In 6 months, you've never been anything but professional, anything but honorable. And the first time something went wrong, I immediately assumed the worst. What does that say about me?" Jack's expression softened. "It says you've been hurt before. It says you've learned to protect yourself because the world hasn't always protected you. That's not a character flaw, Clara. That's survival." Clara wiped her eyes, trying to collect herself. "The detective told me about your military service. He said you were decorated, that you could be making 3 times what I pay you doing private security or contracting work. But you chose this job because it lets you be home for your daughter. Lila, she's 8. She already lost her mother. I won't let her lose her father too, even if it's just to absence instead of death. Can I meet her sometime, I mean? If you think that would be appropriate." Jack was surprised. "Why would you want to?" "Because she's the reason you stayed. The reason you took this job in the first place. And I think I'd like to know the person who inspires that kind of devotion." Jack nodded slowly. "I'd have to ask her first. But if she's comfortable with it, then yes." Clara took a breath, shifting back into CEO mode, though the vulnerability hadn't entirely left her face. "I need to tell you something else. I'm filing charges against Richard Cross and his associates. Sexual harassment, attempted assault, conspiracy. The detective said it's a strong case, especially with the security footage and your testimony. But it's going to be very public, very ugly. Cross will come after me, after the company, after anyone involved." Her eyes met Jack's. That includes you. If you testify, he'll try to destroy your credibility, dig up anything in your past he can use against you. So I need to know if you're willing to do that. I'll understand if you're not. You have Lila to think about. Jack didn't hesitate. I'll testify. I'll tell the truth about what I saw, what happened. If that helps keep Cross and his friends from doing this to someone else, then it's worth whatever he throws at me. Clara's expression shifted, something like admiration mixed with disbelief. You're remarkable, do you know that? Most people talk about doing the right thing. You actually do it regardless of the bomb. Jack shook his head. I'm just a father trying to teach his daughter that decent people still exist. That standing up for others isn't optional, it's required. If I don't live that example, what am I teaching her? That integrity is still the highest rank. Clara smiled through her tears. That's what your wife would have wanted, isn't it? For you to keep being the man she fell in love with. Every single day, Jack's voice was rough with emotion. Every day I try to make her proud, try to show Lila what her mother stood for. Sometimes I fall short, but I keep trying. You're not falling short. You're exactly who your daughter needs you to be. And you're exactly who saved my life last night, even if I didn't understand it at the time. They stood in the garage, two people bound by trauma and choice and the terrible clarity that comes from surviving what should have destroyed you. Outside, the city was waking up people driving to jobs and obligations completely unaware of the quiet heroism that had unfolded in the dark hours. That was fine with Jack. He didn't need recognition. He just needed to live with himself, to look Lila in the eye every morning and know he was worthy of her trust. Clara straightened her posture, wiping away the last evidence of tears. I'm promoting you, Director of Safety, starting next month. You'll oversee security protocols for all Voss Industries properties, develop training programs for employee protection, manage a team. It's a significant increase in responsibility and salary. Jack's mind raced. More money meant better apartment, better schools for Lila college savings that actually mattered. But it also meant more time, more responsibility, less availability for the day-to-day parenting that he'd built his life around. I appreciate the offer, Clara, but I need to think about how it affects Lila. Can I have some time to consider it? Of course. Take whatever time you need, but I want you to know this isn't charity or guilt. You've earned this position. You've demonstrated judgment and courage that most people never manage in an entire career. I want that working for this company in a bigger capacity. I'll give you an answer by the end of the week. That's perfect. Clara glanced at her watch. I have a board meeting at 9. Will you drive me? Jack picked up his clipboard, made a final note on his inspection checklist. The car's ready. Let me pull it around. 20 minutes later, they were driving through morning traffic, the city fully awake now, everyone rushing toward their version of purpose. In the rearview mirror, Jack could see Clara working on her tablet, preparing for the meeting that would likely determine the next phase of her battle against Richard Cross. Her face was composed again, the CEO mask firmly in place. But Jack had seen beneath it now, had glimpsed the woman who existed underneath all that armor. His phone buzzed at a red light. Text from Lila. Have a good day, Daddy. I love you to infinity. Jack smiled, texted back a heart emoji, then focused on the road. The light turned green. Traffic moved forward. And somewhere in the middle of that ordinary morning, Jack Rowan understood that his life had fundamentally changed in the past 48 hours. Not because of the promotion or the police interrogation or even Clara's understanding, but because he'd made a choice in a moment of crisis to stay when leaving would have been easier. And that choice, more than anything else, had proven to him that Sarah's death hadn't destroyed the man she'd married. It had refined him, sharpened his sense of right and wrong until it cut through every comfortable rationalization. He'd stayed because staying was required. Because silence killed and looking away cost lives. Because integrity mattered more than comfort. The Mercedes pulled up to Voss Industries headquarters. Jack parked at the executive entrance, opened Clara's door. She stepped out, then turned back. Jack, thank you. For everything, for staying, for testifying, for being someone I can trust. It's been a long time since I could say that about anyone. You're welcome. And Clara, you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. Taking on cross-filing charges, refusing to let him win, that takes courage most people don't have. I learned from the best. She smiled, genuine and warm. See you at 6. See you at 6. Clara walked into the building, heels clicking against marble, every inch the powerful CEO who'd built an empire through will and vision. But Jack had seen the other Clara, now the one who was scared and vulnerable and human beneath the polish. And he'd made a promise to himself that morning, sitting in that interrogation room, watching her walk in with understanding in her eyes. He would protect her, not because it was his job, but because it was right. Because every woman deserves someone who would stay when darkness came looking. Because Sarah would have wanted him to be that person for others, even though he hadn't been able to be that person for her. Jack drove the Mercedes back to the garage, parked it in its bay, and clocked out for his mid-morning break. He had 2 hours before Clara's next appointment. He spent them walking through Rittenhouse Square, watching people live their lives, thinking about the choice he'd made and the consequences still unfolding. The December air was cold, but clean winter, stripping away everything unnecessary until only the essential remained. His phone rang. Unknown number. Jack answered cautiously. "Hello, Mr. Rowan. This is Richard Cross." Jack's entire body tensed. Every instinct screamed danger, but his voice stayed calm. "How did you get this number?" "I'm a resourceful man." Cross's voice was smooth, confident, the tone of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "I understand you've been telling stories about me to the police. Unfortunate stories. Inaccurate stories. I told the truth about what I witnessed. The truth is subjective, Mr. Rowan, and sometimes pursuing one version of truth can have unintended consequences. You have a daughter, don't you, at 8 years old, attends Franklin Elementary, such a vulnerable age. The world is full of dangers for children." Jack's hand tightened on the phone until his knuckles went white. "If you're threatening my daughter, I'm not threatening anyone. I'm simply observing that a man in your position should think very carefully about the stories he tells and who those stories might affect." Cross paused, letting the implications hang. "Clara Voss is not someone worth protecting, Mr. Rowan. She's cold, vindictive, destroys everyone who gets close to her. Ask her ex-fiancé. Ask the board members she's pushed out. She uses people and discards them. You're just her latest tool, and when she's done with you, you'll be just as discarded as the rest." "I'm hanging up now, Mr. Cross, and I'm reporting this call to Detective Martinez. Before you do that, consider this. Drop your support for Clara's baseless accusations. Convince her to let this matter rest, and I'll make sure your daughter's future is very secure. College fund the best schools opportunities most working-class families can only dream about. Or continue down this path and you'll find that single fathers without resources can lose their children to circumstances beyond their control. Child Protective Services is always concerned about neglect, about children left alone while fathers work long hours. Such tragic situations." Jack's voice was ice. "You just threatened my daughter. That's a crime. And I'm recording this conversation." A pause. Then Cross's voice harder now. "You're recording nothing. This phone line is scrambled, and I made no threats. Simply observations about potential futures. Choose wisely, Mr. Rowan. You have 48 hours to convince Clara to drop her charges. After that, I can't be responsible for what happens." The line went dead. Jack stood in the middle of Rittenhouse Square, surrounded by people living normal Tuesday mornings, completely unaware that Jack's world had just been threatened into a new shape. He immediately called Detective Martinez, explained the conversation. The detective listened, asked clarifying questions, then delivered the news Jack had expected. Without a recording or witnesses, it was, he said, she said. Cross would deny everything, but Martinez promised to note it in the case file, promised to monitor the situation. It wasn't enough. Jack ended the call and sat on a park bench, mind working through scenarios. Cross had power money connections. He could absolutely follow through on his threats, could make Jack's life hell, could potentially create situations where Lila's safety was compromised. But backing down meant letting Cross win, meant letting him continue hurting women with impunity, meant teaching Lila that doing the right thing was conditional dependent on personal cost. No, that was unacceptable. Jack had made his choice, and Cross's threats only confirmed that choice was correct. Men like Richard Cross operated in the shadows, counted on fear and silence to protect them. Jack had spent 8 years in special forces, learning how to face fear and convert it into focused action. Cross had picked the wrong target. Jack pulled out his phone, called Clara directly. She answered on the second ring. "Jack, is everything okay?" No, Richard Cross just called me, made threats against Lila, tried to bribe me into convincing you to drop charges. I reported it to Detective Martinez, but Cross is smart enough that it won't stick. You need to know what you're up against. This man is dangerous, and he's not going to just accept legal consequences without fighting back. Clara's voice was cold, furious. Did he threaten your daughter directly, indirectly? Talked about child protective services, about how single fathers can lose custody, about how vulnerable children are. The implication was clear. That bastard. Clara was silent for a moment, thinking. Jack, I won't blame you if you want to step back from this. Protecting Lila has to be your priority. I can find other witnesses, build the case without your testimony. No, Jack's voice was firm. If I back down, he wins. He learns that threatening children gets him what he wants, and he'll use that tactic against anyone else who tries to hold him accountable. I'm testifying, but I need to make sure Lila is protected while this plays out. I'll hire personal security for her, 24-hour protection, vetted professionals. And I'll have my lawyers draw up documentation that Cross's threats will be part of the criminal case. We'll make this public, make it so obvious that if anything happens to you or Lila, everyone knows exactly who's responsible. It still might not be enough to stop him. Clara's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Then we'll make sure the consequences for trying are so severe that he thinks twice. I'm done being afraid of powerful men, Jack. Done letting them get away with this because fighting back is uncomfortable or risky. You stood up for me. Now I'm standing up for you and Lila. Jack felt something shift inside his chest, a weight redistributing. For 3 years, he'd carried Sarah's death alone, had borne the responsibility of keeping Lila safe without any support system beyond Mrs. Chen's kindness. Now Clara was offering something different, partnership, shared risk, mutual protection. It felt unfamiliar. It felt like hope. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We're about to go to war with one of the most powerful investors in Philadelphia. This is going to get worse before it gets better. But if we win, if we actually hold Cross accountable, maybe other women will feel safe enough to come forward about other men. Maybe we start changing the culture that lets this happen in the first place. That's what Sarah would have wanted. Change not just justice, then let's give it to her. Clara's voice softened. I'll have security at Lila's school by end of day. Discreet, professional, but present. And Jack, I meant what I said earlier. You're remarkable. Most people don't stand up to power when it threatens what they love most. You're choosing to anyway. Because teaching Lila that courage matters is worth more than protecting her from every possible risk. If I show her that you bow to threats, that you sacrifice principle for safety, what kind of person am I raising? The kind who'll change the world someday. Just like her father. They ended the call. Jack sat on the bench a few minutes longer, processing planning. Cross had revealed his hand too early, had shown desperation beneath the power. That was useful. Men who felt cornered made mistakes. Jack just needed to be ready to exploit those mistakes when they came. His phone buzzed. Text from Mrs. Chen. Your daughter is light. I see Sarah in her smile. You're doing good job, Jack. Sarah is proud. Jack's eyes burned. He texted back a simple thank you, then stood and walked back toward the garage. He had work to do, not just driving Clara to meetings, but preparing for the battle ahead, making sure Lila was protected, coordinating with Clara's security team. His life had become complicated in ways he'd hoped to avoid. But complication was the price of staying, of choosing right over easy, of being the man Sarah had believed him to be. At 6 p.m., Jack drove Clara home from her final meeting. The sun had already set, December darkness swallowing the city early. In the rearview mirror, Jack could see Clara's exhaustion, the day's battles etched into her face. But beneath the fatigue was determination, the steel core that had built her company and survived betrayal. Same time tomorrow, Miss Voss. Clara met his eyes in the mirror. Clara, please, after everything, I think we're past Miss Voss. Clara then, same time tomorrow. She nodded, and Jack. Thank you for not backing down, for choosing principle over safety. It means more than you know. Jack pulled up to her building. The doorman was at his post tonight, alert and professional. Security camera blinked its red eye, recording everything. Clara gathered her things, opened her own door before Jack could circle around, and walked into the lobby with her head high. Jack watched until she disappeared into the elevator, then drove away. His life had irrevocably changed in 48 hours. He'd become entangled in something larger than himself, pulled into a fight that would shape more than just his immediate future. But as he drove through Philadelphia's evening traffic toward Mrs. Chen's restaurant to pick up Lila, Jack felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah died. Purpose beyond survival. He was doing the right thing. The cost would be high. The battle would be brutal. But when it was over, when Lila asked him what he'd done when faced with evil, he'd be able to look her in the eye and tell her the truth. He'd stayed. He'd fought. He'd refused to look away. And that, more than any other measure of success, was enough. Mrs. Chen's restaurant glowed warm against the December night neon signs advertising dumplings and noodles in both English and Chinese characters. Jack parked across the street, watching through the window as Lila sat at the back booth, head bent over homework, completely absorbed. Mrs. Chen moved between tables with practiced efficiency, delivering steaming plates, while somehow keeping one eye on the small girl who'd become a fixture in her establishment. Jack crossed the street, bell chiming as he entered. The smell hit him immediately: garlic ginger frying oil, the comfort of food prepared with generosity rather than precision. Lila's head snapped up, face brightening. "Daddy, you're early." Finished work sooner than expected. Jack slid into the booth across from her, noting the math problem spread across the table. "How's it going? Fractions are stupid. Why do I need to know what 1/3 plus 2/5 equals? Because someday you might need to split a pizza fairly between friends with different appetites?" Lila considered this, grudgingly nodded. "Okay, that's actually useful." She gathered her papers, stuffing them into her backpack with the organized chaos only 8-year-olds could achieve. "Can we get dumplings to go, Mrs.?" Chen appeared before Jack could answer, already holding a takeout container. "I pack extra. Growing girl needs food. And you," she pointed at Jack with a serving spoon, "you look too thin." "I add soup." "You don't have to." "Already done." Mrs. Chen's tone brooked no argument. "You take care of my neighborhood. I take care of you. This is how community works." 10 minutes later, Jack and Lila walked home through streets where Christmas lights competed with security cameras for dominance. Lila chattered about her day. Emma's loose tooth had finally fallen out. Science class had watched a video about volcanoes. The cafeteria had served pizza that tasted like cardboard. Normal 8-year-old concerns, blissfully ignorant of Richard Cross and his threats. At home, they ate dumplings straight from the containers, sitting on the couch with a nature documentary playing on mute. Jack only half watched, his mind processing the day's revelations. Clara's determination to fight. Cross's willingness to threaten a child. The security team that would arrive tomorrow, invisible guardians whose presence would fundamentally alter Lila's life. Daddy Lila's voice cut through his thoughts. "Are you in trouble?" Jack set down his chopsticks, turned to face her fully. "What makes you think that?" "You have your worried face, the one you get when bills come or when I'm sick, like you're trying to solve a problem that doesn't have a good answer." "Smart kid. Too smart." Jack chose his words carefully. "There's a situation at work. Someone's not happy about me telling the truth about something I saw. But it's being handled. You don't need to worry. Will you lose your job, though? Actually, they want to promote me, give me more responsibility." Lila's eyes narrowed, reading subtext like Sarah used to. "But the promotion comes with problems." "Everything comes with problems, sweetheart. The question is whether the problems are worth solving for the right reasons. And these problems are," Jack pulled Lila close, tucking her under his arm. "These problems are worth it. Because sometimes you have to stand up for people, even when standing up is hard. Even when it costs you something. Like Mom did." The words hit Jack square in the chest. Yeah, exactly like Mom did. They finished dinner in comfortable silence. Jack supervised toothbrushing and bedtime reading, listening to Lila narrate a chapter about dragons and unlikely friendships. When she finally fell asleep, stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, Jack stood in her doorway and made a silent promise to Sarah's memory: their daughter would grow up safe, whatever it took. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number with a photo attachment. Jack opened it, blood turning cold. The image showed Lila at the bus stop that morning, circled in red. Below it, 48 hours. Jack immediately called Detective Martinez, forwarding the message. The detective's voice was tight with controlled anger. "That's escalation. Direct the threat. I'm sending a unit to your building tonight, and I'm contacting the district attorney. This moves Cross from harassment into criminal intimidation." Will that stop him? Honestly, probably not. Men like Cross think laws are for other people. But it creates documentation, builds the case. And it means we can move faster on protective orders. After the call, Jack sat in the dark living room, every sense heightened. He cataloged sounds traffic outside neighbors' television through thin walls building's heating system, clicking awake. Years of training made it automatic, this constant threat assessment, this readiness for violence. At midnight, his phone rang. Clara, I just got a call from my head of security. Someone accessed my building's camera system, remotely downloaded footage from the past month. Professional job, covered their tracks, but they left enough signatures that we know it was Cross's people. What are they looking for? Patterns. Your comings and goings, Lila's schedule. They're building a profile. Clara's voice was ice over fury. I've upgraded building security, changed all access codes, hired a cybersecurity firm to lock down our systems. But Jack, they had access for at least 3 days. They know everything about your routine. Jack absorbed this mind, already adjusting. Then we changed the routine. Lila doesn't walk to the bus stop anymore. I drive her directly to school. Mrs. Chen's is out until this is over. We vary routes, timing everything. My security team arrives tomorrow at 6 a.m. Former Secret Service best in the business. One will be assigned to Lila specifically, another to you. They'll coordinate with police protection. Lila's going to notice. She'll ask questions. Tell her the truth. Age-appropriate version, but the truth. Clara paused. Kids are resilient, Jack. And lying to protect them often backfires. She deserves to know why her world's changing. You sound like you speak from experience. My father was killed when I was 12. Car accident officially. Really, it was a competitor who tampered with his brakes after a business dispute got ugly. Nobody told me the truth for years. When I finally found out, I was furious, not just about his death, but about being treated like I couldn't handle reality. Clara's voice softened. Don't make that mistake with Lila. After they hung up, Jack made coffee he wouldn't drink and watched the street from his window. At 2 a.m., a police cruiser parked across from his building, silent deterrent. At 3, another car unmarked, 2 occupants took position at the corner. Clara's people probably supplementing police presence. Jack finally attempted sleep at 4, alarm set for 5:30. His dreams were fragmented. Violent Sarah's face, Cross's threats. Lila circled in red. He woke at 5, gave up on rest, and started the coffee maker. When Lila emerged at 6:15, Jack was already dressed, breakfast ready. She stopped in the kitchen doorway, studying his face. Something happened. Sit down, sweetheart. We need to talk. Over pancakes Jack had made to soften the blow, he explained. A man at my work is angry about some things I said to the police. He's trying to scare me into changing my story. So we're going to have some extra protection for a while, people who will make sure we're both safe. Lila absorbed this with unsettling calm. Is he dangerous? He might be. That's why we're being careful. Will he try to hurt me to hurt you? Jack's instinct was to lie, to reassure, to protect her from reality's sharp edges. But Clara's words echoed, kids are resilient. The truth matters. Yes, that's a possibility. That's why I'm not taking any chances with your safety. Lila nodded slowly, processing. Okay, what do I need to do? Just live your normal life. Go to school, play with Emma, do your homework. But you'll notice new people around there to keep you safe. If anything feels weird or wrong, you tell them or me immediately. I'm scared. Lila's voice was small, honest, but also kind of mad. This guy is a jerk for threatening kids. Yeah, he really is, but we're going to stop him from being able to threaten anyone else. Like Mom would have wanted. Exactly like Mom would have wanted. At 7:30, the doorbell rang. Jack checked the peephole, saw a woman in her 40s with alert eyes and professional bearing. He opened the door, keeping Lila behind him. Can I help you? The woman showed credentials. Margaret Torres, licensed security contractor. Formerly Secret Service, Presidential Protective Detail. Miss Voss sent me. I'll be shadowing your daughter today, establishing baseline security protocols. Jack examined the credentials thoroughly, cross-referenced the photo, then stepped aside. Come in, Lila. This is Miss Torres. Lila emerged cautiously. Are you like a bodyguard? Margaret smiled, warm but professional. Something like that. My job is to make sure you're safe without making your life feel different. You probably won't even notice I'm around most of the time. Can you teach me self-defense? Margaret glanced at Jack, who nodded permission. Absolutely. Everyone should know basic defensive techniques. We'll start after school today, if your dad approves. The morning routine proceeded with Margaret as silent observer. She noted exit sightlines Lila's habits. When Jack drove Lila to school, Margaret followed in a separate vehicle. At the drop-off, she approached the principal with credentials and explanation. Within 15 minutes, the school's security team had been briefed, protocols established. Jack drove to Voss Industries, hyper-aware of vehicles around him. The blue sedan 3 cars back was Margaret maintaining distance. The black SUV that merged onto the highway was likely the second security person Claire had mentioned. Jack took an unexpected exit, confirming they followed. Good. Professional. At the office, he found Jennifer waiting at the garage entrance. Mr. Rowan, Miss Voss needs to see you immediately. Conference room B. Jack took the elevator to the 15th floor, walked through corridors buzzing with morning activity. Conference room B was windowless, secure, the kind of space used for sensitive discussions. Inside, Clara sat at the head of a long table. Beside her, 2 people, a woman in an expensive suit who radiated lawyer and Detective Martinez. Clara gestured to a chair. Sit. We're coordinating response to Cross's threats. The lawyer introduced herself, Patricia Hawthorne, partner at one of Philadelphia's most prestigious firms. Mr. Rowan, I've reviewed your statements, the recorded threat, and the photographs sent to your phone. We're pursuing multiple legal avenues, criminal charges for intimidation and stalking, civil restraining orders, and injunctions preventing Cross from accessing certain information systems. How long until those are in place? Restraining order hearing is this afternoon. We're requesting emergency status given the direct threat to a minor. Criminal charges will take longer. District attorney needs to review evidence, build case, but Martinez thinks we can move quickly. The detective leaned forward. Cross made mistakes. The phone threat was sophisticated, but not perfect. We traced the call origin to a burner purchased near Cross's office. The photograph was sent from an IP address that connects to his investment firm's network. He thought he was covering his tracks. He wasn't. Clara's expression was carved from stone. I want him arrested, today. These things take time, Clara. Martinez's voice was patient, practiced. But we're building toward that. Every threat, every misstep strengthens the case. The DA wants this airtight before we move. Cross has expensive lawyers and political connections. We need overwhelming evidence. Then we get overwhelming evidence. Clara turned to Patricia. What about civil exposure, company liabilities, shareholder concerns? I've already filed preliminary motions to freeze Cross's investment in Voss Industries, citing his criminal behavior as breach of partnership agreements. The board meets tomorrow to vote on forced divestment. Given the evidence, I expect unanimous support. Jack listened to the legal machinery spinning into motion, transforming personal violation into systemic response. This was what power looked like when wielded with precision, not brute force but calculated pressure, applied at strategic points until the target collapsed under accumulated weight. What do you need from me? Jack's question cut through the legal discussion. Patricia consulted notes. Your testimony will be crucial at multiple stages. Today's restraining order hearing, possibly criminal proceedings, definitely civil case. You'll need to prepare for intensive questioning. Cross's lawyers will attack your credibility, try to paint you as unstable or opportunistic. I can handle that, can you? Patricia's eyes were sharp, assessing. They'll bring up your military service, imply PTSD. They'll question your motives for staying in Clara's apartment. They'll suggest you're fabricating threats to gain attention or money. They'll make you look like the villain to protect their client. Jack's voice was level, controlled. Let them try. The truth is simple. I witnessed their client attempting to compromise my employer. I intervened. He threatened my daughter in retaliation. Security footage, phone records, and witness statements support every word. If their strategy is to attack my character, they're welcome to try. Clara smiled, something predatory in the expression. See why I promoted him. The meeting continued for another hour, strategies refined, contingencies planned. When it finally concluded, Clara asked Jack to stay. The others filed out, leaving them alone in the secure room. How's Lila handling this? Better than I expected. Scared but processing it. Margaret's with her now, establishing routines. Margaret's the best. Former presidential detail specialized in family protection. If anyone can keep Lila safe, it's her. Jack nodded, grateful but troubled. This isn't what I wanted for her. For us. I took this job specifically to avoid this kind of chaos. You took this job to be present in your daughter's life. You're still doing that, just under different circumstances. Clara's expression softened. And Jack, Lila's learning something invaluable right now. She's learning that her father doesn't back down from bullies, that protecting others is worth personal risk, that integrity isn't conditional. Those lessons will shape who she becomes. I just hope she survives to become anyone. She will. I promise you I will use every resource I have to make sure both of you come through this safe. Jack studied Clara, the CEO who'd been cold and untouchable 6 months ago, now revealing layers of loyalty and determination he hadn't known existed. Why? Why are you doing all this for us? Clara was quiet for a moment, choosing words carefully. Because someone should have done it for Sarah. Because women keep dying or being destroyed. Because men like Cross face no real consequences. Because I'm tired of being afraid. And because you stayed, Jack. When leaving would have been safer, when staying put you at risk, you chose to protect someone you barely knew. That kind of courage shouldn't be punished. It should be rewarded. The afternoon restraining order hearing was held in a courthouse that smelled like old paper and broken promises. Jack sat beside Patricia in uncomfortable wooden chairs, waiting as other cases proceeded. Domestic disputes, custody battles, violence, seeking legal remedy. When their case was called, Richard Cross entered, flanked by 3 lawyers who looked collectively more expensive than Jack's car. Cross's eyes found Jack held his gaze with naked contempt. Jack stared back, unblinking, soldier-facing enemy, without flinching. The judge reviewed evidence with bureaucratic efficiency. Phone records showed Cross's call to Jack. The threatening photograph was documented, traced. Security footage from Clara's building demonstrated the stalking behavior. Cross's lawyers argued circumstantial evidence, coincidence, misunderstanding. Patricia demolished each objection with surgical precision. She entered Sarah's case into the record-establishing pattern of behavior. She produced Clara's testimony about the hotel incident, corroborated by multiple witnesses. She presented expert analysis of the security breach at Clara's building, connecting it to Cross's firm. The judge's ruling was swift. Emergency protective order granted. Richard Cross was prohibited from contact with Jack, Rowan, Lila. Rowan, Clara Voss, or any Voss Industries property. Violation would result in immediate arrest. 1-year duration, subject to extension. Cross stood face purple with suppressed rage. This is persecution. I've done nothing wrong. The judge's voice was ice. Mr. Cross threatening a child crosses legal and moral lines. If you've done nothing wrong, criminal proceedings will establish that. Until then, you will comply with this order or face contempt charges. We're adjourned. Outside the courthouse, Patricia fielded questions from reporters who'd caught wind of the case. Jack pushed through the crowd toward his car, Margaret already there with Lila. His daughter's face was drawn, worried. Is it over? Can we go home now? Jack crouched to her level, speaking quietly. The judge said the bad man can't come near us anymore. If he tries, he gets arrested. So yes, we can go home. And tonight we're going to have the most normal evening possible, homework dinner. Maybe ice cream if you finish your vegetables. Lila managed a small smile. Bribery is a sign of weak parenting, Daddy. Effective parenting uses all available tools. That night, Jack kept his promise. They made spaghetti together, Lila standing on a chair to stir sauce while Jack handled the boiling water. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, ostensibly reading a tablet, but actually monitoring the apartment's enhanced security system. After dinner, they watched a movie about talking animals saving their forest. Lila fell asleep halfway through, head on Jack's shoulder. He carried her to bed, tucked her in, watched her sleep for long minutes. 8 years old. She should be worrying about fractions and loose teeth, not restraining orders and bodyguards. But the world didn't care about should. It only cared about what actually happened. Jack returned to the living room where Margaret was conducting her final security sweep. Everything's locked down. Motion sensors, active cameras monitoring all entry points. I'll be in the car outside if you need anything. She paused at the door. Your daughter's strong, Mr. Rowan. Stronger than she knows. She gets it from her mother. Margaret nodded, understanding in her eyes. The good ones always do. After she left, Jack sat in the dark apartment, phone in hand. He scrolled through photos of Sarah wedding day, Lila's birth, 1,000 mundane moments that added up to a life. In one image, Sarah was laughing at some forgotten joke, her face lit with joy Jack could no longer remember the source of. I'm trying, Sarah. Trying to be the man you married the father Lila deserves. Hope I'm not screwing it up too badly. His phone buzzed. Text from Clara Board voted unanimously to divest Cross from the company, effective immediately. His investment is being liquidated, all board access revoked. He's lost his foothold in Voss Industries. Another text followed, and the DA just called. They're filing formal charges tomorrow. Criminal intimidation, stalking, attempted assault on me from the hotel night. Cross will be arrested within 48 hours. Jack typed back, thank you for everything. Clara's response came immediately. Thank me when it's over. Until then, we keep fighting. Jack set down his phone, allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Cross was losing. Slowly, systematically, every advantage he'd relied on was being stripped away. Power and money couldn't protect him from documented evidence and public scrutiny. The system was working for once because people had refused to look away. But Jack's military experience had taught him that wounded predators were most dangerous. Cross would strike back. The question was when and how. Jack needed to be ready. The next morning brought news that accelerated everything. Patricia called at 7 a.m. voice tense. Cross didn't wait to be arrested. He fled. Private jet left Philadelphia at midnight, flight plan filed for the Cayman Islands. Authorities are working on extradition, but it's going to be complicated. Jack felt his stomach drop. So he's just gone free. Not exactly, Patricia's voice hardened. Fleeing makes him look guilty, strengthens our civil case. And the DA is pursuing fugitive warrants, which means if Cross ever returns to the U.S., he faces immediate arrest. He's trapped outside the country, losing money, daily reputation destroyed. That's not freedom, that's exile. What about the other two, Webb and Chen? They're cooperating with prosecutors, providing evidence against Cross in exchange for reduced charges. Turns out when the leader abandons ship, loyalty evaporates quickly. Jack ended the call, processed this development. Cross was gone, but not defeated, exiled, but not imprisoned. It wasn't the clean victory Jack had hoped for, but it was something. Clara was safe. Lila was safe. And Cross would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, waiting for legal consequences to catch up. At breakfast, Lila sensed the shift in Jack's mood. Good news. The bad man left the country. He can't come back without being arrested. So we won. Jack considered how to answer honestly. We survived. We protected each other. We made sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. That's close enough to winning. Mom would say, that's exactly winning. Yeah, she would. That afternoon, Clara called Jack to her office. He found her standing at the window overlooking Philadelphia City, spread below like pieces on a board she'd learned to play with ruthless efficiency. The board wants to present you with a formal commendation. Public ceremony recognition for protecting me and helping expose Cross. She turned to face him. I told them you'd probably hate that. I would. That's what I thought. So instead, I'm implementing the Safe Ride program, effective immediately. Company-funded transportation for any employee who needs it, day or night, no questions asked. You'll oversee development and training. We're calling it the Sarah Rowan Initiative. Jack's throat tightened. Clara, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Sarah died because nobody stayed, because systems failed and powerful men faced no consequences. This program means no Voss Industries employee will ever be in that position again. And naming it after Sarah ensures everyone knows why it matters. Thank you. It was inadequate, insufficient, but all Jack could manage. Clara walked to her desk, retrieved a folder. There's something else. Patricia tracked down the investigative files from Sarah's case. The original detective retired, but he kept copies of everything, witness statements the police ignored. Evidence they didn't pursue, names of people who contradicted the official story. Jack's hands trembled as he took the folder. Why are you giving me this? Because you deserve to know what really happened. And because if you want to reopen Sarah's case with this new evidence, I'll provide all legal resources necessary. Clara's voice was gentle but firm. You stayed for me. Let me stay for you. Jack opened the folder, saw Sarah's face in the first photograph. Crime scene photo, clinical and devastating. Below it, statements from witnesses who'd been at the party, who'd seen the men with Sarah, who'd tried to tell the police their suspicions. All of it dismissed, buried, forgotten. I don't know if I can do this. reliving it, fighting again when we just finished fighting. You don't have to decide now. Take the file, read it when you're ready. But know that justice delayed isn't always justice denied. Sometimes it's just justice waiting for the right moment. Jack left Clara's office with the folder under his arm, weight of past and present, compressing into this single collection of papers. In his car, he sat for long minutes staring at the folder, debating. Then he placed it in the glove compartment and started the engine. Today was about surviving. Tomorrow could be about justice. He picked up Lila from school, Margaret following in her vehicle. His daughter was laughing about something Emma had said, normal 8-year-old joy reasserting itself. Jack drove them home, made dinner, supervised homework. After Lila went to bed, he pulled out the folder. Reading it was agony. Each page revealed new details, new failures, new evidence that Sarah's death had been preventable. Witnesses who saw the men spike her drink. A server who tried to intervene. Security footage from the hotel showing Sarah stumbling, being led away by 3 men. The pills found in her system weren't ones she'd ever been prescribed. The investigation that stopped after 48 hours because the men involved had connections, lawyers' money. Jack read until 3 a.m. tears he'd suppressed for years finally breaking through. Sarah had fought. She tried to get help. And the system had failed her at every level, prioritizing powerful men's reputations over a woman's life. At dawn, Jack made a decision. He called Patricia Hawthorne, waking her up not caring. I want to reopen my wife's case. Use the evidence in this folder, everything Clara's team can dig up. Those men killed Sarah. I want them held accountable. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Mr. Rowan, you should know this will be difficult. Evidence is old. Some witnesses may be dead or untraceable. Statute of limitations may have expired on certain charges. But I'll review everything, consult with criminal prosecutors, see what's possible. Just try. That's all I'm asking. After the call, Jack sat at his kitchen table as Philadelphia woke up outside. Somewhere in the Cayman Islands, Richard Cross was probably sleeping in expensive sheets, thinking he'd escaped. But Jack had learned something these past days: escape was temporary. Truth had gravity. Eventually, everyone fell back to earth. His phone buzzed. Text from Clara. I heard you called Patricia. Whatever you need, whatever resources this takes, you have my full support. We finished what we started. Jack texted back. Both fights, Cross and Sarah. We finished both. Clara bound together. That's how we win. Jack looked at Sarah's photograph on the nightstand, her smile frozen in time. He couldn't bring her back. Couldn't undo the past. But he could make sure her death meant something, that the men who'd killed her faced consequences, that other women were protected by systems that had failed Sarah. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was what Jack had to give, and he'd give it with everything he possessed. When Lila woke at 6:30, she found Jack making pancakes, chocolate chips, Sarah's specialty. The apartment smelled like love and determination, and the possibility that justice might exist after all. They ate together, father and daughter, survivors of tragedy, warriors for tomorrow. Outside, Margaret took up position in her vehicle. The city flowed around them, millions of people living lives they'd never intersect with. But in this small apartment, in this quiet breakfast, 2 people were preparing for battles that would shape more than just their own futures. Jack looked at Lila across the table, saw Sarah in her eyes, and made a silent vow their story wouldn't end in exile and escape. It would end in accountability, in change, in systems reformed, and predators stopped. It would end in the kind of justice Sarah deserved but never received. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. 3 weeks after Cross's flight to the Cayman Islands, Patricia Hawthorne's office resembled a war room. Maps covered one wall, connecting investments and shell companies and offshore accounts in a web that Patricia's forensic accountants had spent countless hours unraveling. Clara sat at the conference table reviewing documents. Jack stood by the window, watching Philadelphia's streets below ordinary people, living ordinary lives, unaware that above them, justice was being carefully constructed from paper trails and electronic signatures. Patricia entered, carrying a thick binder, expression triumphant. We found it. The smoking gun. Clara looked up sharply. Found what Cross didn't just flee prosecution. He embezzled $12 million from his investment fund before leaving. Falsified reports moved money through offshore accounts, left his investors holding worthless paper. Patricia spread documents across the table. Federal securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering. The SEC is filing charges today, FBI already has warrants. Jack turned from the window. That brings him back. Patricia's smile was sharp as broken glass. Better. Every country with extradition treaties now has legal obligation to return him. Caymans won't harbor a fugitive facing federal charges. He'll be on a plane to Philadelphia within the week in handcuffs, facing decades in prison. Clara's expression was carved from ice and vindication. What about the others, Webb and Chen? Their cooperation bought them reduced charges on the assault attempt. But the financial crimes are different. They were partners in Cross's fund, signed off on documents. They're implicated too. Patricia paused. Webb especially. Turns out his betrayal of you 5 years ago involves similar financial manipulation. We've reopened that case. Jack watched Clara's face as she processed this information. 5 years of walls of isolation, of refusing to trust all of it, built on Marcus Webb's betrayal. Now that betrayal was unraveling into criminal consequences. There was justice in that, bitter and necessary. When do we go public? Clara's voice was controlled, CEO making strategic decisions. Press conference tomorrow. Federal prosecutors want you there. Victim impact corporate governance angle. Jack too, if he's willing. Patricia looked at him. Your testimony about the threats, the stalking, it humanizes the case. Shows Cross isn't just a white-collar criminal, but a predator. I'll be there. The next morning, Philadelphia's federal buildings swarmed with media. News vans lined the street, reporters jockeying for position. Cameras pointed at the building's entrance like weapons waiting to fire. Jack arrived early with Clara, both dressed in their professional armor. Her in navy power suit, him in the black suit he'd worn through everything. Inside, federal prosecutors briefed them on messaging. Stay factual, don't speculate, let the evidence speak. Assistant U.S. Attorney Monica Richardson was 45, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, the kind of prosecutor who'd built her career on taking down people who thought themselves untouchable. She reviewed their statements, corrected phrasing, ensured they understood the legal boundaries. At 10 a.m. they walked into the press conference. Cameras flashed like lightning. Questions erupted before anyone reached the podium. Richardson raised a hand, silence gradually settling. Today, federal authorities have filed multiple charges against Richard Cross, Marcus Webb, and David Chen. Securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, criminal intimidation, attempted assault. Richardson's voice was steel-wrapped in legal precision. These men use their positions of power and wealth to victimize investors, employees, and vulnerable individuals. They believed their money would protect them. They were wrong. She introduced Clara. The CEO stepped to the microphone, face composed, voice steady. 3 weeks ago, Richard Cross attempted to sexually assault me at a corporate event. When my driver intervened, Cross threatened his 8-year-old daughter to silence our testimony. When that failed, he embezzled millions and fled the country. Clara paused, letting the statement sink in. Today we're here to say that power doesn't equal immunity, that wealth doesn't purchase justice, that women and children deserve protection from predators regardless of how expensive their lawyers are. Reporters erupted with questions. Clara answered with surgical precision, never wavering, never showing weakness. Jack stood to the side, watching her transform personal violation into public declaration, weaponizing vulnerability into strength. When Clara finished, Richardson gestured Jack forward. He stepped to the microphone, uncomfortable with the attention, but understanding its necessity. My name is Jack Rowan. I'm a father, a veteran, and an employee of Voss Industries. 3 weeks ago, I witnessed Richard Cross attempt to assault my employer. When I intervened and provided testimony to police, Cross threatened my daughter's safety. He sent photographs of her to my phone. He called with veiled warnings about child protective services and accidents. His voice remained level, factual. I'm here because no child should be threatened for their parents' courage. No woman should be assaulted because powerful men feel entitled to their bodies. And no predator should escape consequences simply because they can afford a plane ticket. The room fell silent. Then questions, dozens of them, overlapping and urgent. Jack answered what he could, deflected what he couldn't, maintain the controlled composure that military training had burned into his nervous system. After 40 minutes, Richardson ended the conference. Jack and Clara were escorted out through a side entrance, away from the media frenzy. In the car, Clara exhaled shakily, adrenaline draining and leaving her pale. That was harder than I expected. Jack pulled into traffic, eyes scanning for threats out of habit. You did well, better than well. You gave other victims permission to come forward. Clara's phone buzzed. She checked its expression, shifting from exhaustion to disbelief. It's starting. 3 women just contacted my office. They have similar stories about Cross about Webb. They saw the press conference and want to testify. Jack glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting Clara's eyes. That's what courage looks like. You stood up so they could stand up. By evening, the number had grown to 7 women. By the next morning, 15. Each with their own story of assault harassment threats. Each having stayed silent because Cross's power had seemed insurmountable. Clara's press conference had shattered that illusion, proved that even the powerful could fall. Patricia Hawthorne's office became coordination center for the growing case. Statements were taken, evidence collected, patterns documented. The federal case against Cross expanded from financial crimes to include multiple counts of sexual assault, criminal intimidation, witness tampering. If convicted on all charges, he faced life in prison. 1 week after the press conference, Cross was arrested at his Cayman Islands compound. Photographs showed him in handcuffs being led to an FBI plane, his face no longer arrogant, but hollowed by fear. Jack saw the images on the news and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just weary acknowledgement that justice moves slowly but sometimes actually arrived. Clara called him that evening. He's being arraigned tomorrow. Bail hearing. Prosecutors are arguing flight risk given his previous escape. Will you attend? I think I need to see him in that courtroom in chains facing consequences. Clara's voice was quiet. Will you come with me? Yes, the courtroom was packed. Victims, reporters, curiosity seekers drawn to the spectacle of power dismantled. Jack and Clara sat in the front row, separated from Cross by wooden barriers and the weight of everything he'd done. When guards brought Cross in, Jack studied the man who'd threatened his daughter. Cross looked smaller, somehow diminished by orange jumpsuit and shackles authority stripped away to reveal the frightened predator beneath. The judge denied bail. Flight risk, danger to witnesses, severity of charges. Cross would remain imprisoned until trial. His lawyers protested, argued, cited precedents. The judge remained unmoved. Richard Cross had fled once. The court wouldn't give him opportunity for a second escape. As guards led Cross away, he looked at Clara and Jack. His eyes held hatred, impotent and desperate. Jack met his gaze without flinching, soldier assessing defeated enemy. Cross looked away first. Outside the courthouse, Clara stopped on the steps. It's really over. He can't hurt anyone anymore. The trial's still coming. He'll fight, but he'll lose. Clara's voice held certainty Jack hadn't heard before. The evidence is overwhelming. The witnesses are credible, and his flight destroyed any sympathy he might have had. He's done. Jack nodded, allowing himself to believe it. Then we focus forward, on the program, on making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. That night, Jack returned home to find Lila at the kitchen table with Margaret working on a school project about heroes. Lila's poster board displayed photographs and hand-drawn images, firefighters, doctors, teachers. And in the center, a photograph Jack hadn't known she'd kept him in his army uniform, younger before Sarah's death had aged him. Daddy Lila looked up, face bright. I'm doing my project on heroes. Miss Torres helped me find these pictures. Margaret smiled from across the table. She wanted to include you. I hope that's okay. Jack sat beside Lila, studying the poster. I'm not a hero, sweetheart. I just did what anyone should do. Lila's expression turned serious, Sarah's wisdom looking out from her 8-year-old face. That's what makes you a hero, Daddy. You think everyone would do it, but they don't. You do. That's the difference. Jack pulled her close, throat tight with emotion, too large for words. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just notice more when I say stuff you need to hear. Margaret stood gathering her things. I'll be outside. Good work today, Lila. Your mom would be proud of that poster. After Margaret left, Jack and Lila finished the project together. They glued photographs, wrote captions, created visual story of courage in its various forms. When they finished, Lila stepped back to assess their work. You should give a speech at my school about being a hero. I'm really not comfortable with public speaking. Miss Voss said you did a press conference with TV cameras and everything. Jack smiled despite himself. That was different. That was necessary. This is necessary too. Kids need to know that heroes are regular people who just decide to do the right thing. Lila paused, considering. Plus, Emma thinks you're cool. If you come speak, I'll get like 100 social points. Jack laughed, the sound surprising him. Okay, if your teacher approves, I'll come talk to your class. 2 days later, Jack stood in front of 33rd graders feeling more nervous than he'd been facing federal prosecutors. Lila sat in the front row beaming. Her teacher, Mrs. Morrison, introduced him with a warmth that made Jack uncomfortable with unearned praise. He kept it simple, talked about making choices when things were hard, about staying when leaving would be easier, about protecting others because it was right, not because it won rewards. The kids listened with the selective attention of 8-year-olds, mostly present, occasionally distracted, asking questions that veered from insightful to nonsensical. Afterward, Emma approached him. Mr. Rowan, my mom said you're a hero because you protected Miss Voss from bad men. Is that true? Jack crouched to her level. I helped someone who needed help. That's not heroic, that's basic decency, but lots of people don't help. So maybe basic decency is heroic now, from the mouths of 8-year-olds. Jack smiled. Maybe you're right. That evening, Clara called. How was the school visit? Terrifying. Jack was making dinner, phone wedged between shoulder and ear. Third graders are tougher audience than federal prosecutors. Clara laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded. I'm hosting a dinner next week. Small group: Patricia, Detective Martinez, a few others who helped with the case. I'd like you and Lila to come, if you're comfortable with that. Jack hesitated. Lila in a room with adults discussing her father's involvement in taking down a predator. But Clara continued before he could respond. It won't be about the case. It'll be about celebrating the people who stood up, who refused to look away. And I think Lila should see that her father's courage created community, not just consequences. All right, we'll be there. The dinner was held at Clara's apartment, the same space where Jack had kept vigil weeks ago. But the atmosphere had transformed. Warm lighting, comfortable furniture rearranged to encourage conversation. The smell of catered food filling rooms that had seemed cold and empty before. Lila was nervous until Margaret arrived, immediately putting her at ease. The two had bonded during the security detail, developing the kind of friendship that transcended age and professional boundaries. They settled on the couch, Margaret is showing Lila photographs from her Secret Service days. Patricia arrived with her husband, a quiet professor who taught philosophy and seemed bemused by his wife's courtroom ferocity. Detective Martinez brought his teenage daughter, introducing her to Jack with obvious pride. Monica Richardson, the federal prosecutor, came alone, bringing expensive wine and dry humor that kept the conversation moving. They ate at Clara's dining table, expanded to accommodate everyone, passing dishes family style. Lila sat between Jack and Clara, eyes wide at being included in an adult gathering. The conversation ranged across topics: Martinez's daughter's college applications, Patricia's husband's upcoming book, Margaret's retirement plans. After dinner, Clara stood and raised her glass. To everyone here, thank you. Not just for helping with the case, but for restoring my faith that good people still exist. That courage isn't extinct. That standing up matters. They drank. Then Martinez raised his glass. To Jack Rowan, who proved that doing the right thing doesn't require a badge, just a conscience and willingness to act. More toasts followed, warmth and wine, loosening tongues and breaking down professional distance. Jack found himself talking to Martinez's daughter about military service, answering her questions about deployment with honesty tempered by awareness of her age. Patricia's husband engaged Lila in debate about what made someone brave, listening to her 8-year-old philosophy with genuine interest. Later, as dishes were cleared and coffee served, Clara pulled Jack aside to her balcony. City lights spread below Philadelphia at night, both beautiful and brutal. I'm scared. Clara's admission was quiet, vulnerable. The trial starts in 3 months. Cross's lawyers are already filing motions trying to exclude evidence, attacking witnesses' credibility. What if we lose? We won't. Jack's voice held certainty he had learned to trust. The evidence is overwhelming. 15 women testifying, security footage, phone records. His flight alone demonstrates guilt. Juries understand that innocent people don't run. But what if Clara turned to face him? What if money wins again? What if powerful men protect their own? What if Sarah's case taught us that the system only works for people with resources? Jack was quiet, acknowledging the fear beneath her questions. Then we fight harder. We use resources. We have a your platform. Patricia's firm federal prosecution. We make the cost of protecting Cross higher than the cost of convicting him. And we trust that 15 women's voices are louder than one man's money. Clara nodded slowly. When did you become so optimistic? I'm not optimistic. I'm determined. There's a difference. They stood in comfortable silence, breathing cold December air, watching the city that had witnessed their battle. Behind them, through the glass doors, Lila's laugh rang out at something Margaret had said. Normal life knitting itself back together after trauma's disruption. I'm accepting the promotion. Jack's statement surprised himself, the decision forming as he spoke. Director of Safety, I'll oversee the Sarah Rowan Initiative, develop training programs, make sure no employee faces what you faced. Clara's smile was brilliant, unguarded. I'm so glad. You'll be incredible at it. I'm terrified I'll fail. That I'm not qualified, that I'm just a driver pretending to understand corporate safety. You kept me alive when trained security would have failed. You protected your daughter against a predator with unlimited resources. You testified despite threats that would have silenced most people. Clara's voice was firm. You're not pretending anything. You're exactly who this job needs. Inside, Patricia was organizing charades, splitting the group into teams despite protests. Lila nominated Jack for their team, Margaret and Martinez's daughter joining them. The game devolved into laughter and terrible pantomimes, serious adults temporarily abandoning dignity for joy. Jack watched Lila acting out some movie he didn't recognize, her face animated with delight. This was what he'd wanted when he took the mob 6 months ago, moments of normalcy for his daughter, spaces where she could just be a kid. The path to get here had been brutal, marked by threats and fear and confrontations with evil. But they'd arrived. Lila was safe, laughing, surrounded by people who'd fought for her protection. The evening ended, late guests departing with hugs and promises to stay connected. Jack carried sleeping Lila to the car, Margaret following to ensure their safe departure. In the back seat, his daughter stirred, mumbled something incoherent. Did you have fun, sweetheart? Best dinner ever. Lila's voice was thick with sleep. Miss Clara's nice. I like her. Me too. Are you going to marry her? Jack nearly drove off the road. What? No, we're just friends, colleagues. Lila was asleep again before he finished protesting. Jack glanced in the rearview mirror at Margaret, who was studiously pretending she hadn't heard. 8-year-olds had no filter and too much insight. 3 months passed in preparation for trial. Jack balanced his new role, officially Director of Safety, though still transitioning from driving duties, with testimony prep and Lila's increasingly busy schedule. The Sarah Rowan Initiative launched quietly, vans marked with discreet logos, drivers trained in threat assessment and victim support. In the first month, the program assisted 47 employees, preventing 3 potential assaults and providing safe transport for dozens of others. Clara threw herself into work with renewed intensity, using the company as vehicle for change. She implemented zero-tolerance harassment policies, mandatory bystander intervention, training, anonymous reporting systems. Voss Industries became case study in corporate responsibility, featured in business journals and ethics courses. The trial began on a cold March morning. Courtroom 6A in Philadelphia's federal courthouse filled with victims, reporters, and citizens who'd followed the case. Richard Cross sat at the defense table, expensive suit and empty eyes, flanked by lawyers who'd spent 3 months building arguments from sand. The prosecution's case was methodical, devastating. Monica Richardson entered evidence with surgical precision, security footage from the hotel phone records of threats, testimony from 15 women Cross had victimized over 2 decades. Each piece built on the last, constructing narrative of serial predation, enabled by wealth and protected by power. Jack testified on day 3. Richardson led him through the night at the hotel, the threats against Lila, the photographs sent to his phone. Cross's lawyers attacked on cross-examination, suggesting Jack had fabricated everything for attention, for money, for 15 minutes of fame. Jack remained calm, answering each question with factual precision. His military record spoke for itself. His financial situation, modest but stable, undermined claims of monetary motivation. And his daughter's terrified face in that photograph destroyed any suggestion he'd invented the threat. Clara testified on day 5. She described the hotel evening, the men's behavior, waking in her apartment with no memory. Cross's lawyers tried to paint her as vindictive ex-lover seeking revenge. Patricia objected before Clara could respond. Judge sustained, but the accusation hung in the air like poison. On redirect, Richardson asked simple question. Miss Voss, what's your motivation for being here today? Clara looked directly at the jury. To prevent this from happening to anyone else. To show that powerful men can face consequences. To honor women who didn't survive their assaults. Her voice broke slightly. And to prove that staying silent protects predators while speaking up protects victims. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Closing arguments were delivered on a Friday afternoon, March sun streaming through courthouse windows. The jury deliberated through the weekend, returning Monday morning with verdicts. Guilty on all counts, securities fraud assault, intimidation, witness tampering. Richard Cross would spend the rest of his life in the prison. His wealth and power finally encountering accountability they'd evaded for decades. Clara sat beside Jack in the courtroom, tears streaming down her face. Patricia squeezed her hand. Behind them, the 15 women who testified held each other, crying and laughing simultaneously. Justice had arrived late, imperfect, incomplete, but real. Outside, media swarmed. Richardson gave brief statement about justice prevailing, about gratitude to victims for their courage. Clara declined to speak, still processing. Jack simply said, "Today proves that doing the right thing matters." That's enough. 6 months later, on a warm September evening, the Sarah Rowan Initiative held its official launch event. City Hall steps were crowded with employees, survivors, advocates. Clara stood at the podium, Jack beside her, both wearing formal attire that still felt uncomfortable after months of preparation. 1 year ago, something happened that changed my life. I was vulnerable, alone, in danger. Clara's voice carried across the crowd. And one man stayed, not because he had to, not because he'd be rewarded, but because it was the right thing to do. She looked at Jack. Some heroes wear capes, some wear badges. Mine wore humility. Applause rippled through the crowd. Clara continued describing the program's success. 200 employees assisted in 6 months partnerships with other companies, adopting similar initiatives, legislative proposals for mandatory corporate safety programs. Then Jack stepped to the microphone. He'd prepared remarks, but set them aside, speaking from the heart instead. I'm not a hero. I'm just a father trying to teach his daughter right from wrong. His voice steadied as he found his message. My wife Sarah died because nobody stayed, because people looked away. I started this job promising myself I'd never look away again. He paused, locating Lila in the crowd standing with Margaret. This program isn't about me. It's about Sarah. It's about every person who needed help and didn't get it. It's about making sure that from now on, someone will always stay. The crowd rose to their feet, applause thundering. Jack stepped back, overwhelmed, seeking Lila's face. She was crying, proud tears streaming down her 9-year-old face. She mouthed words he could read. I love you, Daddy. After the speeches and photos, Jack found quiet corner where Lila and Margaret waited. His daughter threw herself at him, hugging fiercely. That was the best speech ever. Jack laughed, lifting her. I just told the truth. That's what made it good. Lila pulled back, studying his face with Sarah's perceptive eyes. Mom would be so proud. I am too. Clara approached, having escaped the remaining press. Amazing speech, both of you. Jack set Lila down, suddenly aware of his daughter's knowing smile. Thank you for believing in this, for making it real. We made it real together. Clara crouched to Lila's level. Your dad's pretty special. You know that I know. Lila's expression turned serious. Are you taking care of him because he's really good at taking care of everyone else, but forgets about himself sometimes? Clara's eyes met Jack's over Lila's head. Something passing between them, understanding possibility, the complicated navigation of two people learning to trust after trauma. I'm working on it. The launch event transitioned to informal gathering. Jack found himself talking to survivors the program had helped, hearing their stories, understanding the impact his choice to stay had created. Each conversation reinforced the lesson he'd tried to teach. Lila, individual actions mattered. Courage was contagious. Standing up gave others permission to stand up too. Later, after most guests had departed, Jack stood with Clara and Lila at the top of City Hall steps. Philadelphia spread below city lights, reflecting off rivers and buildings, millions of lives unfolding in darkness, punctuated by illumination. What happens now? Clara's question was quiet, contemplative. Now we keep going. Jack's answer was simple. We expand the program, train more people, partner with more companies. We make sure Sarah's death means something. Impersonally, Jack glanced at Lila, who was pretending not to listen while absolutely listening. Personally, I figure out how to be director of safety, single father, and maybe something resembling happy. Not necessarily in that order. Clara smiled, the expression transforming her face into something younger, lighter. Sounds like a good plan. They stood together as the city breathed around them, three people bound by trauma and choice, and the hard-won knowledge that darkness could be fought with small lights accumulated over time. Jack thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made to honor her memory. This program, this moment, Lila's pride, it was all part of keeping that promise. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "Hi, this is Melissa. I'm being followed from a bar. Can you help?" Jack's instincts sharpened immediately. He pulled up the Safe Ride app, saw Melissa's location blinking red, already typing a response when Clara looked over his shoulder. "First real-time call." Jack nodded, texting. "Stay on public streets. Don't go home. I'm sending a car now. What's your location?" Clara pulled out her own phone, dispatching the nearest Safe Ride vehicle. ETA 5 minutes. Driver's name is Carlos, former police, excellent at threat assessment. Jack continued texting with Melissa, keeping her calm, gathering information. The follower was male 40s, had been at the same bar, now walking 20 feet behind her on Market Street. Melissa was scared but coherent, following Jack's instructions to stay in lit areas near other people. 4 minutes later, car's here. "Thank you so much. I'll be okay now." Jack exhaled, adrenaline slowly draining. First call, but not the last. Lila tugged his sleeve. "You just saved someone, didn't you?" Team effort. Jack gestured to Clara. "We all did, but it was your program. Your idea." Lila's voice was fierce with pride. "Just like Mom would have wanted." "Yeah, just like Mom would have wanted." They walked to the parking garage, together, this odd family formed by crisis and maintained by choice. Margaret met them at Jack's car, having monitored the whole evening from respectful distance. "Everything good." "Everything's good." Driving home through quiet streets, Lila fell asleep in the back seat. Jack glanced at her in the rearview mirror, this perfect, impossible child who carried Sarah's wisdom and Jack's determination. He'd spent 3 years terrified of failing her, of being inadequate parent, of letting her down the way he'd let Sarah down. But tonight, listening to survivors thank him, watching Clara coordinate rescue in real time, seeing Lila's proud tears, Jack understood he hadn't failed. He just kept going, kept staying when leaving would be easier, kept choosing right over comfortable, kept being the man Sarah had married, the father Lila deserved. At home, Jack carried Lila to bed, tucked her in with her stuffed rabbit. She stirred, mumbled, "Love you, Daddy. Best hero ever. Just a father, sweetheart. Just trying my best." Same thing. Jack stood in her doorway, watching her sleep, Sarah's photograph on the dresser, catching streetlight from the window. 3 years ago, Sarah had died because nobody stayed. Tonight, Melissa lived because someone did. That was the difference Jack had fought to create, simple, profound, essential. His phone buzzed. "Clara, thank you for everything, for staying then, for fighting now, for being exactly who you are." Jack typed back, "Thank you for seeing it, for building something from tragedy, for turning pain into protection." A pause, then dinner this week. Just us, no case, no program, just two people trying to figure out what comes after surviving. Jack stared at the message, heart accelerating. This was territory he hadn't navigated in years, doors he'd locked in after Sarah's death. But Clara wasn't asking him to forget Sarah. She was asking if he was ready to live again, to believe happiness wasn't betrayal of memory. He typed, "Yes. Dinner sounds good." Jack set down his phone, walked to his bedroom, lay down on the bed he'd bought after Sarah died, because sleeping in their shared bed had felt impossible. Tomorrow he'd respond to more Safe Ride calls, train more drivers, expand the program into new territories. Tomorrow he'd help Lila with homework and have dinner with Clara and continue building the life Sarah would have wanted for them. But tonight, lying in darkness, listening to Philadelphia's ambient noise, Jack allowed himself to believe what Lila had said, that basic decency was heroic when so many people chose otherwise. That staying mattered, that integrity was still the highest rank, and that sometimes surviving meant living with purpose, loving without fear, protecting others because Sarah hadn't been protected. It meant teaching Lila through actions that courage was choice, that justice was possible, that good people still existed if you refused to stop being one. Jack closed his eyes, exhaustion finally claiming him. His last thought before sleep was Sarah's face, her smile, her voice saying what he needed to hear. I'm proud of you. Keep going. Stay.